Hello, everyone. This is Michelle Earhart from Tom's Hardware, here with the Tom's Hardware Show for September 23rd. Today, we're going to be talking about the new Microsoft Surface announcements from yesterday, and our senior editor, Andrew Friedman, is going to give us an inside look at the new Alienware x17. Without further ado, let's get on with the show. Hello, everyone. This is Michelle Earhart, staff writer with Tom's Hardware. I'm joined here today by our managing editor, Matt Safford.
Hello.
And our senior editor, Andrew Friedman.
Hi.
How's it going, guys?
Good.
It's a long, busy week.
Yeah, Andrew's been busy.
And part of that reason you were busy kind of brings us to our first topic. Yesterday, Microsoft had a big Surface event where it introduced a bunch of new devices or iterations on old devices. You got a chance to get a hands-on with these, Andrew. We have pictures pulled up. Before we get into that, any quick takeaways or notes that you want to dive into?
I mean, overall, I guess there were roughly 8 announcements in total. They refreshed basically everything but the Surface laptop, in that there's the Surface Book Studio, the Surface Laptop Studio, which we'll talk about, took the place of the Surface Book. There's a Surface Pro 8, which I think everybody's expecting. The Surface Go 3 saw a minor upgrade. The Surface Pro X has a new base model without LTE. It's just Wi-Fi. And then there's, of course, the Surface Duo 2, which is its Android device, as well as some smaller announcements like a new keyboard made out of recycled ocean plastic and a set of stickers and sort of openers to help people of all levels of ability interact with their computers in an easier fashion.
And we do have a comment noticing our other co-host, that is my cat, Sayla, in the background. Oh, she's found a way to open the door. So she's left the show, but nice little cameo. Other cameos, these are the devices that we saw yesterday. This would be the Surface Laptop Studio up top. I believe This is the Surface Pro 8 that I'm mousing over.
Yes.
This would be the X. This would be the Duo 2.
That's the Surface Go 3 on the
this is the Surface Go 3. We don't have the X in this photo?
Well, you know what? I'll tell you what. I couldn't tell you if the one on the left from the top is the X or the Pro 8. They look basically the same at this point. You'd have to look at the back to tell the difference. So it represents.
Skip ahead, because I'm not as much of a Surface expert as you. Can you tell me what the big difference between the 8 and the X is?
Sure. So the 8 is sort of the continuation that we've seen since Surface Pro started. And the big version thing here is that it's based on Intel processors. So they're using Tiger Lake U series processors, while the Surface Pro X was first revealed a couple of years ago now. And it's running on Microsoft's ARM processors, the SQ1 and the SQ2, which are based off of Qualcomm Snapdragon chips. So the difference at this point, beyond obviously levels of performance, is whether or not you want an Intel system with a fan or you want a fanless system, in which case you might go with the Snapdragon system.
Gotcha. So the X is kind of more mobile oriented, and the 8 is kind of closer to a traditional laptop, I guess.
Sort of. When the X was announced, it was a big deal because they couldn't get the Intel ones that small. They couldn't get the borders that small. They didn't have the design that nice. And that's clearly changed, as we'll see with the 8. The 8 is a big jump from a design perspective.
So I have a photo of the 8 over here, but before we go into that, I also want to show off. There's this ocean plastic mouse. Do you want to talk about that for a bit, Andrew, while I look for my photo?
Sure. The ocean plastic mouse, I mean, it's cute. They're using some recycled plastic to make the mouse. I think it's roughly 20%. And it's a $25 mouse. It uses a AA battery. So if that makes you feel good about yourself, great. I don't know how that will sell compared to Microsoft's regular mouses. It feels a little weird in the hand, but it looks like a really cute bar of soap.
It does look really cute. I wasn't expecting it to feel weird. Lots of things come with recycled plastic or paper right now, and it feels the same to me, which I guess is a good thing. But anyway, I have the Surface Pro 8 pulled up here. Yes. So what's new about this device compared to the previous Surface Pro?
Right. So that's Microsoft's render of the Surface Pro 8, but it's what it looks like. And first of all, they've moved it up to the 11th gen core processors and the Iris Xe graphics. This is the biggest redesign we've seen of it since the Surface Pro 3. And so basically, like, since like 2014, it's looked the same, more or less. And in this case, you have these rounded
Sorry, it's a phone
corners.
call.
Okay. You have these rounded corners on it that make it look nice and more modern. The bezels are thinner, though, as you can see, still there. In fact, they actually look thicker there than I remembered. They've switched to anodized aluminum from magnesium, which the Surfaces have always used. And in this case, that display, which is the 13 inches, is now 120 hertz. And that's for use with their new Surface Slim Pen 2, which can also send feedback, like haptic feedback to the pen, and that works across almost all of them now. And that's what you see in the picture there is actually the old Surface Pen. But
Gotcha.
it happens to be. But yeah, and so in the keyboard, there will be a slot that charges it, and it's magnetized, and so it slots it in there for when you're not using it. But in this case, they've really, in a lot of ways, caught up to the Surface Pro X design-wise, to the point where I was asking somebody at Microsoft when I went hands-on, like, why does the Pro X exist? And the answer is some people might want a fanless system.
Gotcha. So I have a photo pulled up here of your hands-on time with the Surface Pro 8. I assume that's the new pen in the center there?
That's the new pen in the slot right there.
Great.
And the 120 hertz, it comes 60 hertz out of the box, they said. You can go into settings.
You have to adjust it up to 120 hertz.
Right. So you can go to settings, adjust up to 120 hertz. But apparently, and because I asked, well, what's that going to do with battery life? But apparently, if it uses algorithms to know what type of application you have open. And what they said to me is that, you go into something like Excel that's not going to take advantage of that, then they'll throttle it down to 30 or 40 because that's not going to do anything at 120 hertz. So that's really aimed at at creative applications where you're drawing and like having drawing that line or doing that shading comes so much smoother. And that's what that's all for.
That's what I was going to ask about. I mean, I don't know how much time you had to spend with it, but I think at every single pen-based computing device that I've used in the past, there's always some kind of noticeable lag that makes it feel unnatural. And, I'm wondering if, doubling the refresh rate makes a big difference in that.
I got to try it a little bit with the Surface Laptop Studio, not as much at the Pro 8, but that also has the 120 hertz screen. And I don't think it was really enough time to tell. These are all pretty quick demos.
Sure.
But the big thing that I think they're really pushing more than that is the way that the screen has this G6 chip. It's custom silicon that works with the stylus to make it vibrate. It has haptic feedback when you're drawing. So like when you pick tools in Adobe Fresco, it will change and you'll get these bumps. So you're getting almost this confirmation. And when you're drawing, it has these sort of very minuscule vibrations. I thought made a difference, but again, it was very, short test. I'll have to try it longer to really tell. But to be this feels a little bit more like you're on paper. Even though there's very little resistance from the nub onto the screen. So it's an interesting feature, and we'll see how it goes. The other big thing on the Pro 8 is that it's switched to Thunderbolt 4, which finally they haven't used Thunderbolt on the Surfaces ever, and now we have two of them with Thunderbolt, both the Pro 8 and the Surface Laptop Studio. But that also means there's no Type A ports. They've gotten rid of those altogether.
Ouch.
Yeah. Geez, if you want a tablet now with a Type A port, do you have any options from the big names left?
Off the top of my head, possibly not. I mean, I think what Microsoft would tell you to do is that they still have the proprietary Surface connector on there, which you could charge over Thunderbolt 4. It'll work, but they continue having their magnetized thing that has never been excellent. But they're just very stubborn, despite people always calling for it to be changed in lieu of Type-C. But they do have a docking station off of that allows lots of USB Type-A. I'd imagine what they say to people is to use a dongle either with Thunderbolt 4 or to use their docking station.
Gotcha. Well, if you want a more laptopy environment with the Surface product, there's another option for you. But before we get on to that, we have a question from Oliver. No, we haven't yet talked about the Alienware x17. We do have that lined up. We're going to get to that after we finish talking about the Surface event, but feel free to put your questions down below, and we'll definitely get to those. In the meantime, the Surface Book is now gone. Am I correct? We have now instead the Surface Laptop Studio.
Yeah, so that's what they said. They said it.
I was just going to say
book.
that name is, I don't know.
I don't
maybe
know.
I'm just not used to it yet.
I stumbled over it.
Yeah,
Is
it feels
Surface Studio
stumbly.
Laptop Studio.
I think it's just so easy to say book because like we've known the book for a number of years.
Yeah.
It does make some sense that they have the Surface Laptop, they have the Surface Laptop Go, which is like the Surface Go of Surface laptops, and there is the Studio Desktop, which this is kind of like. And I think for those like looking at this right here, this has 3 positions, right? You have your standard laptop, in which case you can't really tell it's anything special. It'll flip out in front like you just had it there, where you could flip it out to be like sort of a screen where the touchpad is still usable. And maybe that's if you're giving a presentation or you're watching a movie, and then it'll slip all the way down into like a studio mode where you can draw on it with a tablet or draw on it like a tablet and that's the Surface Pen 2 there. That's one of the very helpful people from Microsoft's beautiful artwork there.
That's not you drawing?
That one, no, those are not my bracelets. But
so this is not a detachable, right? Like the previous Surface Book?
It's not. The previous Surface Books, there were 13 and 15 inches, and they were these tablets that would pull out of a base that would often have a graphics card and had a separate battery. This one is attached by this really flexible hinge, and it just pulls into these sort of 3 stances, for lack of a better term.
What do you prefer? You've had hands-on time with both, correct?
I've had a lot more time with the books because we reviewed a handful of those. This one has some benefits in that the Surface Books all had to have the CPU and battery and their hard drives and everything behind the screen. So there's really limited space, and they're always using the U-series chips, and it was ostensibly a creative device. With this design, they can put everything in the base, which is really nice. And they've gone up to an RTX 3050 Ti, which isn't the most powerful, but about as powerful as I've ever got in the book. But if you wanted a detachable tablet like that, especially at the 15-inch size, there's not anything else really like that on the market. So for those people, I've seen some mourning on Twitter for the Surface Book.
I mean, I've heard a lot about admittedly, they're kind of niche use case scenarios, but people in real estate, doctors, who have gotten a lot of use out of having a traditional laptop when it's plugged in, and then having a slim tablet that they can do basic things on while walking around.
Yeah, my one concern with this is you can fold it down, but you still have the whole laptop. Is it going to be chunkier than the Surface Book?
There was there was a developer at Microsoft yesterday. His name's Scott Hanselman, and he posted a picture of the Surface Laptop Studio on top of the Surface Book. I think it was the 15-inch model, and it did not seem particularly larger. Okay. If you can move it back 1 or 2 pictures, you'll see there's a bit of a visual trick they play here, in that you can see on the very bottom of the picture, and for those listening to this podcast, I'll describe it as best I can. There's a bit of a pedestal underneath it, and then on top of that, there's the part with with the Thunderbolt 4 ports and everything like that, and that kind of makes it to the eye look a lot thinner when you have it on a desk. But I would imagine they're going to suggest most people will probably be using it on a laptop, or at like a laptop on a desk. It's a 14-inch screen, so it's kind of between the 13 and 15-inch screen sizes. But I didn't really get to take it anywhere with me. It kind of stayed there.
But one of the benefits you mentioned were the internals, right? So we have this nice little picture provided by Microsoft. Can you go through how this can improve over the Surface Book with its new design?
Right. I mean, so the big thing there is the big difference is that Intel chip, that they've moved from using a U-series, a 15-watt chip, to this is the Tiger Lake H35 processors. So if you're doing something creative that's CPU intensive, you're going to get a lot more power here. And a lot of people have been asking that for a while. And I don't know why they didn't go for the 45-watt chip. I don't know if that has something to do with thermals, but that they could put that and a GPU in there, and they're not limited by the fact that someone has to hold this like a tablet occasionally and worry about heat.
Awesome.
Something Matt and I have been. I'm sorry.
No, go on. I was going to ask if Matt had any comments on the Laptop Studio.
I mean, yeah, I was just going to ask, I think the, going back to the Pro 8, they also changed the thermal envelope for that too, right?
Yeah, they've redesigned the Pro 8's thermal envelope, they said, where it can now go up to, I want to say they said 23 watts. So,
I mean, like that, I think for a lot of people that have used those devices, that's a big deal because, you know, in the past, you know, like performance would look really good on paper, but yeah, like once you tried to do something like video editing or something, like they would throttle very fast. So, and then you're not in a anything that takes a significant amount of time to complete. You're not getting the performance you might expect from the silicon. So, you know, I mean, I think it's for those people, it's an important update, and I'm curious to see what performance is going to be like both on that and this, right?
the other big thing I think Matt and I were talking a lot about before the show, Michelle, is that this design, while ostensibly very new, is I think just new to a lot of people.
Yeah,
And that,
it's not the pull forward thing is something I've seen before. It's just
Acer did it. Other
positioning
companies have
it
done
as a replacement for the Surface Book. I don't know if it hits the same niche for me. Like I've been reading a lot of comic books recently using the Marvel app on the iPad. And the ideal like thought of getting a Surface Book to me is I can work on it during the day, and then when it's time to read comics, I just pop the screen off, and then on the same laptop I do everything else on. I can treat it like a tablet. This, you know, is a bit heftier.
They might suggest to you to get the Surface Pro. So then again,
but that's not powerful enough for my work is the thing. I guess, you know, we're moving into a time period where you're just expected to have a bunch of different devices.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to say as someone who's been covering convertibles for like a decade, right? I mean, that was one of the things that I said from the very beginning when these things started getting popular is like, it's not really ideal for a lot of people, right? In most cases, what you get is, you know, a compromise on both sides, right? So you have a convertible, maybe, you know, some aspect of the laptop portion of it isn't as good, and then like tablet might not be as good. And if you like a separate device, whether it's an iPad or an Android tablet or whatever, you know, for reading things, is in general probably going to give you a better experience than one device. I mean, you know, that's kind of trying to do two things at the same time. So
these devices tend to be pretty expensive.
Yeah,
Otherwise, I feel like they'd be best for like college students where you have like the small dorm, you don't have room for a bunch of different devices. You just need to have like one thing that's the center of your life.
Yeah, I mean, this one starts at I had it up here at 1,600, which is a lot. But the thing about the tablet I find is just really interesting. Like we were saying, this has been done before. I mean, apparently Sony was doing this with Vio back when Windows 8 came out. But that we've seen more recently, Acer has done it several times. And where Acer does it is in its Concept D easel family, which are more workstation-y. And that's for, you know, people who are drawing or doing some sort of editing that requires that. And then HP has done it more recently on the Elite Folio, which was an ARM-based device. And it's a lot thinner, but the idea was it was like a clipboard. So the question is, where does the Surface Laptop Studio fall? And I think the answer is more towards the Concept D than towards an iPad. The question is, did all of the people who found that benefit in the Surface Book, like they're probably going to lose some of that. It's true.
The easel format does make me think that it's going to appeal a lot to artists. I don't know if it's going to appeal so much to them that they don't just get dedicated drawing tablets with screens in them. But it's definitely an improvement over this sort of thing that I have here.
It's like a Wacom.
Yeah, it's very difficult to draw on here, but then see the results of your drawing on screen. Yep. So for casual use, these again, this isn't new for Microsoft, but drawing on a tablet is very helpful, and having that easel form factor is definitely something that the Surface Book couldn't do before. Something that I am curious about then, before we move on to our next thing, I just want to ask, did you get to use the Haptic Pen a lot, Andrew? What were your thoughts using it? Did you appreciate the haptics?
Yeah, so I only got to use it briefly, like I said earlier. And I think like there were some things like using it in Excel where like, oh, like they've added things in Windows 11 into Office to be like, oh, making sure if you write numbers that works better. And my handwriting's pretty bad, and that worked. Where it felt like it was making more of a difference was in something like a CAD program or in Fresco, where they already had them set up to work. And to their credit, it did kind of feel like, oh, it's making these minuscule vibrations that make it feel more like it's dragging along paper than glass. And they've actually made it so there's less friction with the stylus. Is it enough that it's going to make people really care? That I don't know. I'm not actually that type of creator in my day job. So we're going to have to find some people who really use Photoshop or Fresco or AutoCAD all the time and see, A, how much of the software ends up working, like how much of it gets developer support, and B, how many people find value in that, because it's $130 stylus on top of
So it does not come with these devices.
Right. No, it doesn't. It doesn't come with the device. So I got to say, this one is has one real cute thing for it, which is that there is that little platform. There's space under that lip, just like stick the thing magnetically and it charges there, which is nice. But yeah, Microsoft, and it's not as big a deal with the Surface Laptop. Well, it is a big deal with the Surface Laptop Studio because I think they assume you're going to get the pen. With the Pro 8, sure, it starts at like 1100, but that's without the key, without the wireless key, or without the not wireless, the Bluetooth, the magnetic keyboard, and without a stylus, which maybe you need, maybe you don't, but otherwise you're just getting a tablet out of the box. Yeah, and look at that. And if you look at Microsoft's marketing, even just yesterday, they almost always show it with a stylus or with the stylus and the keyboard, or at least the keyboard, and that's for a reason, because that's the big differentiator. Otherwise, it's a very large iPad that runs Windows.
Yeah, and you can get accessories like this for the iPad. So like this is mostly for if you're a Microsoft loyalist, I guess.
I will say though that for years, there was a big push for like Windows tablets around, I think, Windows 8, and there were a lot of like super cheap ones, and the whole time that all these things were coming out, I was like, yeah, but who wants to do like there's no great software in Windows for tablets, right? And like they were trying to get developers to make them and it never happened, but eventually, I know it's not coming at launch, but there's supposed to be Android support Windows 11, right? I think whenever that happens, as long as it's not terrible, and it may be terrible, but as long as it's not terrible, that I think will make using a Windows tablet a lot more appealing, because there are tablet apps in Android.
Yeah, and it'll be much nicer than using an Android emulator, I think, which is something that we've seen in a lot of gaming laptops. That's more so that you can have your idle games running in the background or whatever. Yeah. But it'll be nice to be able to use them officially in Windows. But speaking of Windows device, go on, Andrew, sorry.
It's just the one thing I was going to say just on Matt's note real quick is that the one thing that is a little more touch-friendly now is Windows 11.
Yeah,
like they made sure to show to me when I was looking at the Surface Laptop Studio that when you have it in laptop mode, okay, everything's centered in the dock now. But as soon as you put it into either of the touch modes, it knows, and it spreads everything out and gives you bigger touch points. It knows if you pull out a stylus, and then it'll change Excel to all of the features you would use with the stylus. So whether or not there's going to be the programs you use, and maybe you'd be doing something like reading or something like that. I'm sure they have that. But what's more important is that Windows 10 was not very touch friendly. Hopefully Windows 11 will work for both. And they're really trying to show that on these.
Yeah, I just did a quick search because I know Windows has been trying also to just make the default operating system more touch friendly by just making more apps too. But they're not fully there. So like I said earlier, one of the reasons I use tablets is to read comic books. And I can read off the Marvel Unlimited app on iPad, but in order to do that on Windows, I just checked. I still need to do it in browser. And hot take review for the Marvel Unlimited browser app. It's bad. But anyway, speaking of sort of book form factors and things that you can't get from Apple, I do want to move on to the Alienware laptop. But I am very curious just to hear your thoughts on the new Surface Duo 2. Andrew, what do you think?
Sure.
Did you get a hands-on with this?
I did. I'll be real quick about it, which is that, first of all, on paper, it looks better. I mean, obviously I didn't get to try it for a long time, but it has the specs of a modern phone. It has a Snapdragon 888. It has 5G. You can use NFC to pay for things. And those are all things that were lacking from the from the original. It has 3 cameras. It has a telephoto and an ultra wide and the regular wide camera. So in that way, like, okay, this looks like it's actually out of the oven this time. The big question for me is still, how are people going to put this to use? And obviously Microsoft's apps are there, but I mean, I'll be frank, I picked up the thing and I still had to think about it for a sec. How do I use this two screen phone? Where do I put this? And part of that obviously goes away with practice and having a lot of time with a phone. But there are a lot of things that are going to be different. If this is a phone that you're going to want to take pictures with, people are going to have to learn how to take pictures with something that you open. And then you have things like notifications, they did something pretty smart. They've curved the glass on the inside so that when you look through it, like through the hinge, when it's closed, it'll show you glanceable notifications, which is neat, but it doesn't show you the information you might see on other foldable phones like Samsung's that have slightly bigger screens. So they're experimenting.
Yeah, I was going to say the curved edge with notifications is something that like Samsung did like 6 years ago and like has already moved past it. But yeah, I mean, the other thing that I would say about it, just in looking at it in pictures, is it looks real big.
Yeah.
To be toting around everywhere. I love the idea of having 2 screens, but like the idea of that being my phone, and like always having to have somewhere to put it.
You know, they say phone. Is this a Windows phone? Is this I don't have a lot of experience.
It's running
Surface Duo.
It's running Android 11.
Okay.
Which they're still promising will hit the original Surface Duo, though it has not yet. So it's the latest version of Android. But they pre-install the entire Office 365 suite and a bunch of other Microsoft apps, and it's designed to work as best as it can with your phone in Windows 11 or Windows 10, depending which one you use. So in that way, it's very Microsoft.
Does it come with like a SIM card? Can I get like it put on my Verizon or whatever, or am I stuck to Skype?
You can get a SIM card. The original one was largely locked to AT&T, though they eventually unlocked it. This one they said will be unlocked to all carriers from the start, which is a much better move. However, this is a $1,500 phone to start, which is, it's a lot of money. And I mean, Samsung and Apple do go up over $1,000 all the time, but they've also made that goodwill with the people who buy their phones. Mm-hmm. And Microsoft's first one, while it had a lot of good idea, kind of tanked. Like it hit, like Matt was saying, like we were talking the other day, and like it hit like $400 and like a Woot sale.
Woot. Yep.
Yeah.
Speaking of things that other manufacturers are doing, do you know why in the age of bendable screens, this still looks like a Nintendo DS?
I like the Nintendo DS look.
Here we go.
But
it was so funny seeing during the Microsoft announcement. They were talking about 2-screen gaming like it was some big new thing, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean, the reason they pushed for the original is this idea of being able to multitask in a way that is sort of enforced. And so the idea that you have these defined boundaries for doing these 2 things, whereas when you have one screen, it might not be as easy to do that. Clearly, they're continuing to go this route. I don't know if they have a plan to eventually go foldable, but this is definitely like something that they've chosen to do. I mean, look, Samsung makes their own displays. Maybe they've had years to practice with that, but they've gone this route. It definitely has some interesting ideas. I mean, dual screen gaming, okay, fine. But like this was like a game that they specifically got them to add a second screen for, which they deemed to be a big deal. But they're also talking about it as like the Xbox Game Pass phone, which is funny because you can run Xbox Game Pass, or you can run xCloud on basically any Android phone or iPhone at this point. But I mean, it is kind of cool to do it that way. It's a nice size screen for it. But yeah, it is 2 screens. You got to get used to everything being 2 screens. You can run across them, but then I recommend holding it horizontally because you can't really read like an article or something with the line going down.
Yeah, I guess there is some benefit to this demarcation here between the 2 screens. I don't have a photo of it, but they did show, again, this isn't new to Microsoft, but they did show during the event someone cooking, and they had like their recipe video on this top screen, and then the like actual list of ingredients on the bottom screen, which I guess is slightly more convenient than just like having my flat iPhone next to me while I do recipes, which is something I do while I cook. So maybe I'd get use out of that. I'd maybe only use it like 5 times a year. but there is some benefit to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of the most appealing thing, obviously, is just having multiple apps. So, on the screen, right? So like Slack or whatever chat app you use, and then, so like I feel like I'm not saying it would be an ideal situation, but like if I was somewhere for like a couple hours and I wanted to actually get some work done, like I could be doing something in whatever Word or whatever, editing a story, and also like making sure I'm not missing like important messages from the staff, like, and things like that, without having to jump, between apps. So, I mean, as someone who, until I started using gigantic television screens as monitors, as someone who always loved multiple screens, like having that extra display is definitely appealing to me. I just don't know that I mean, as you said, I don't know if I would use it enough to warrant like carrying around this giant thing.
Exactly. Because, like, again, this is like having those multiple screens open is nice, but only if you don't have access to like monitors. So you look at it while you're on the train.
And once again, like if you need a larger Android device, sometimes get a like $200 Lenovo tablet, right?
Yeah, I can't see this replacing a tablet. Does it add enough functionality to a phone? I guess is the question.
I think it could replace a tablet. This is like, you open it up, I think it's roughly the size. I mean, it's a little smaller, but like roughly the size of an iPad mini.
What about
like,
this in the way, this little hinge?
It's not. It's that part's not ideal, I think, but I think it could for some people. I think for me, for like the amount where like I'd only use a tablet to read books, it could definitely do the job.
My ideal device like this, which I have yet to see anyone do, but that I really want to see, is an e-ink device with this form factor, just so that it can feel like a book in my hands.
There was a phone, there was a Russian-made phone like 5 years ago that had a screen on the front and an e-ink screen on the back. And
not the same, but close.
It's interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
Although that does lead me to, I don't want to talk too long about the Surface Duo 2, but I've noticed a lot of phones with bendable screens have also taken this thing where, so this is the back of the phone, but the other side of the phone would then have a screen on the front, and then you could open it up so you could choose between one screen or two screen. It just feels to me like Microsoft's a little bit behind what dedicated phone manufacturers are doing with this form factor. But I guess if you really love Windows, which you're not getting on this phone, but you want to support it, there you go. So we're done talking about Microsoft Surface for now. Thank you for bearing with us. I'm sorry we ended on the most interesting of devices. Let's move on to something a little bit more hardcore. Andrew, I understand you have the Alienware x17 to show us.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. This is there's also a 15-inch model, but we reviewed the 17 for now. Stay tuned. And we reviewed it with a Core i7-11800H and RTX 3080. This is actually kind of, I mean, you'll see here, it's designed to be real sort of slim. There are a lot of things I really like this design as far as gaming laptops go, in that it still says to me, hey, I'm a gaming laptop, but it doesn't sort of scream it a lot. And that it has like this sort of soft touch white paint, but it's black on the inside. It's just visually interesting without really yelling it at you, like without red stripes. I mean, obviously there's RGB all over the place.
Yeah, it looks like you're holding a lightsaber, but
no, it's more like the Starship than the lightsaber. They brought.
Yeah,
oh,
go ahead. No, I was just gonna say it's been fun to see that what you're showing right now, like the light up touchpad, which has gone away and come back, I think about 4 times now.
Yeah, it's back here. I believe it was gone for a while due to issues with drivers, but it's back here. It will like shut off for battery's sake, and you can customize all of this. This is the out of the box lighting experience. We also tested it with the mechanical Cherry keyboard, which you probably can't hear the way I can hear it.
I do hear it. I do.
Yeah, you can. Okay.
It sounds great.
Yeah, it sounds great. They had offered it on the M series, but I hadn't tried it yet. I think it feels excellent. I love it for typing. I was worried I wouldn't love it for gaming. I also really like it for gaming. It might be a little loud. Like if you work in an office, I can see people where like people don't already use mechanical keyboards. I could see people getting a little annoyed. But in general, I think this keyboard feels really nice. However, that is an option that you pay extra for. That is not standard. So the one we reviewed was, as of the time of the review, about $3,600. But
so that actually leads me to a question from a viewer. I want to get into your general thoughts, but while we're talking about the keyboard and the price, our friend Oliver is back. He's mentioned that he's seen reports of malfunctions from the keyboard, screen not working, talks about the price a little bit, but have you seen any of this scuttlebutt about keyboard malfunctions? I'm not sure if Oliver's talking about the cherry or the membrane one, but
I had no issues with the keyboard. I don't know if they're referring to issues with the cherry or the non-cherry one or the membrane. So I had no issues with that. The camera, also the webcam, totally worked for me. The only thing I know is like sometimes I got a little too close for Windows Hello and I had to move back a bit, but like that was probably more of a me problem. But like I just turned the camera on off screen right now and it's working fine. So if that is an issue, it's not on our unit. We'll have to look more into that. But in this case, yeah, and look, if I bought this laptop at this configuration and had those issues, I'd be really pissed.
Yeah.
So I totally understand where they're coming from, but it did not occur on the sample we tried.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Oliver. We'll definitely keep an eye out. If you get this laptop and notice that, I would definitely call Dell about it because you shouldn't have to deal with those issues at this price. But with the unit you had, Andrew, what was your general experience like?
Right. So like I said, I think from a fit and finish perspective, this thing is really cool. It's really thin. There's not a lot of ports on the side, which I think might be weird for some people. There's the power jack heat on the left side, and then on the right, there's just the standard headphones, and everything else is relegated to the rear, which includes USB, Thunderbolt, Ethernet, DisplayPort, HDMI. You have the whole shebang there. It's all in the back, and that doesn't really bother me on a 17-incher because even though this is so thin, I think usually you get a 17-inch laptop, it's kind of meant to be sort of a desktop replacement. So I imagine most people are going to leave it there. I kind of wish they would put the power jack in the back, actually, so that in the other side it could put in like a USB, a USB drive or something, and run games off of that or save work to that. It does get a little warm. This thing has a pretty unique design. You'll notice fans along the sides, but then also coming out the back. And there's 4 fans in here. And then Intel is using a new TIM, or a thermal interface material, that they call Element 31. That's supposed to keep everything not necessarily cool, but to run stable. And while I didn't have issues with game stability, there were a couple games where it didn't necessarily run as well as some competing gaming laptops with RTX 3080 did in our testing. I mean, obviously, as drivers and things like that update, maybe that'll change, but that is one thing to consider when you're getting something this expensive. But again, it's also a thinner one. So that thing was a bit of that part was a bit of a bummer, but not unusable. Like nothing played under 60 frames per second. The thing I will say, and I wish you could see it on here, is I love this display. It's not even listed as OLED, but it is absolutely gorgeous. We have the 4K display here, and it is extremely bright and extremely colorful. I do know they make I believe a 1080p 360 hertz one. We didn't get to try that one, but I really like looking at stuff on it. Like watching video on it is great. Games look great. So I really appreciated that part just in general, because if I'm spending so much to play games, I want them to look really good. But my perhaps the thing that I had sort of an issue, it's not an issue, it's just an option I think people should understand, is that Alienware has made a laptop. Look, we gave this a 4 out of 5. I like this thing. But they also make the M17 series, which might be a little thicker and a little clunkier and not as new, but is basically just as good, and in some performance cases was slightly better. And we really like that. And I think for some people, especially if they could find that cheaper, they should consider that one along with the other things we compared, like the MSI Raider, because while this is beautiful, there's definitely some vanity that you're paying for. And I think at a certain point, this will probably become the standard, but it's not that now.
Awesome. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you reviewed the 4K OLED model, right?
It is 4K. I do not believe it to be OLED.
Okay, it's not OLED because we have a comment here saying that the 4K one does not have advanced Optimus. Is that something that you noticed?
I'm gonna have to double check on that one. I do hear that they are putting out BIOS updates, so we might have to look into that. It's also it's a 120 hertz display, which is also just interesting for 4K in general. But we'll have to go back and look at that. I have heard about BIOS updates being put out. That is, in general, a tough thing just about reviewing laptops the way we do, and that there's always going to be another BIOS update or another driver update. And there are a bunch of people who have had the laptop now for possibly even a couple of months without having those. So it's important to consider what everybody has had and will get. And yeah,
it's also an indication that companies should wait until things are ready before they put them out.
Yeah.
Like, wait until it's ready before you sell it. Don't sell it and then, like, do this.
But everyone loves a redemption story in that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Since Final Fantasy 14, which I really love, but it feels like companies could just get away now with releasing broken things and fixing them.
Well, Walter does make a good point that, yeah, you can go into these settings, change things, and you can always do that. And look, we also test games at certain settings and things like that. But we often look at things out of the box the way they came, because that's like, while this is probably more enthusiast laptop, a lot of people just buy things and that is how they think it works. I am seeing more of the comments that there's a BIOS update to enable the mux switch, which should switch better between the graphics. So we'll have to look into that, but that might add a couple % here and there. I don't think it's going to overall like absolutely change how everything plays on it.
Great. So speaking of a couple of % here and there, you mentioned as an alternative to this, the M17, being that performance isn't that different and in some cases better. What would be the benefit to getting the M17 over this one? Is that price or?
I mean, it was primarily that when we did our testing, there were some cases in which the M17 was doing better, and that frankly, while this is this is promoted as being a very thin laptop, and it is, the M17 actually isn't that much thicker, right? So you can still get, if you like Alienware's brand or their service or the way their stuff works, you can still get that quality in another 17-inch laptop. It's more that in some cases, and right now prices are fluctuating up and down for every electronic on the market, but you might be able to get it without the pricing for the fact that you have to pay extra to make up for like this cooling system and things like that. So it's more saying that, hey, like if you want something that runs a little cooler, because that one did run a little bit cooler in our testing, and you want to make sure, and that's something you value, and you want to make sure you're getting that performance, hey, Alienware also has the M17, which is a good laptop we really like. So that's not to say nobody should get the X17, because I enjoyed the X17. I had a great time with the keyboard. I think it looks great. I think the screen is great. But there are flaws that, if depending on what you value over other things in a laptop, you might want to look at other options. And that includes the M17, which is still a really good laptop.
Speaking of values and other laptops, I'm curious to hear both of your opinions on this, because I'm actually looking at you on a 1440p screen right now. I think that's the great sweet spot that I really enjoy right now. And according to our friend Walter, this laptop does not come with a 1440p screen. Do you feel like that's a big loss, Andrew? Or
I mean, I feel like that's definitely a personal preference thing. There are laptops we're starting to see, like Razer put out the Blade with the 1440p display, which we really like to see, and I think there's been an increase in those. It's a lot about preference. I feel like once you get into $3,000, people are just expecting 4K screens.
That's true.
This thing's over. You can get like the over 2,000 they started, but you're getting like 1080p 360 hertz screens. I get the question I would wonder, and I don't know this, I haven't asked anybody at Dell this, is how many 17-inch QHD, how many 17-inch 1440p screens actually exist? They might just not exist, or there might not be a huge demand for them.
I mean, it might be cheaper. It's probably cheaper for them to source 4K panels. So that's why, I mean, at least with a 3080, you have enough horsepower to actually do some gaming at 4K. What's been more frustrating to me is to see so many devices over the last few years that have 4K screens and then like low end or mid range GPUs, and it's like, well, thanks, but like I'm going to be gaming at 1080p anyway.
That reminds me of a laptop I reviewed a little while back that had a Core i9 processor with a RTX 3060. Sometimes it feels like these specs are just mismatched. I wonder how much that has to do with availability right now, with ongoing shortages.
One thing about the screen I find really fascinating is the fact that it is 4K 120 hertz. I haven't seen that on a gaming laptop before, but while the 3080 might ostensibly run some games at 4K, especially if you're willing to tweak with the settings, it's not going to do it at 120 hertz.
I assume it's there more for an either or thing than an and thing.
That's what I suspect, is that it's very much for people who like, oh, I'm going to bump this game down to 1080p, and now it's going to run faster.
Yeah, I appreciate seeing that on a laptop. What I really want to see more of that on, actually, and we did write a news story on this last weekend about a development we might see in a few years, but gaming TVs, I want to see them come out with more 4K and high refresh rate options, because the consoles are capable of that now.
I mean, I can speak to that from personal experience. So what I'm looking at as I as I do the show is a LG C1 55-inch OLED, and I mean, aside from some issues that I'm possibly overheating issues that I've been having, which isn't great, it looks amazing, and I didn't actually have a cable handy that could handle 120 hertz 4K. I had to buy one. So I'd used the monitor for the TV for 5 or 6 days at 60 hertz. And when I got the cable and plugged it in and then switched it over to 120, I think due to power issues, the screen gets dimmer and like the colors are more muted. And not looking at it at 120 hertz for like 5 minutes, I was like, I prefer 60 and the brighter display and the richer colors, and have switched back to 60 and haven't gone back to 120 since. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's going to be the same issue with other TVs or other, high refresh 4K monitors, but I don't know. It wasn't, I mean, I'm not a competitive gamer, so I don't necessarily feel the need for super fast refresh rate, but having experienced both on this TV, it's going to stay at 60 probably 95% of the time, if not more.
That's a good point too. When you go for the high refresh rate option, you do lose out on some of that 4K fidelity, and maybe that doesn't feel like too much of a loss if your monitor can't do 4K. But if it can, it kind of feels a bit like a Sophie's choice, I guess.
And I also I mean, I've always kind of said it's becoming inevitable, but I don't really want to get super used to 120 hertz or faster displays, because then every display that I look at that doesn't have that is going to look terrible.
We talk about the high refresh rate being used for gaming a lot. But another reason to get it is just to make your operating system feel snappier. Have you noticed that with this, Andrew? Was that helpful to you at all? I guess that is one point where 4K at 120 hertz could happen. I don't think it takes too much processing power to move your cursor around.
I mean, everything feels really smooth and snappy in terms of windows. It's funny. I feel like when I'm looking at games, I'm looking for that personally, and I notice it when I see it. But when I'm looking at Windows, I just kind of see Windows.
That's fair.
If that makes sense. So everything was nice and smooth. I actually don't know off the top of my head what Windows 10 runs at, just like what the desktop runs at. But it looks nice. It has bright color. It has bright colors and is bright itself. And it's nice and accurate. And yeah, like the screen on its own, this 4K 120 hertz panel, at least the one we saw here, is really a showstopper. And I say is probably the reason to get the laptop.
Awesome. Well, if you ask me, this laptop is an Alienware, and its cooling element is called element 31 instead of element 51. So it's obviously trash garbage. But no, that element comes from Intel. It's not really their fault. But it looks very
No,
pretty.
I think it is Dell's cooling solution. Like
Oh, okay.
it is their
Oh,
TIM.
they should have called it element 50. I take it back. It's garbage. It's garbage that's earned 4 stars because, speaking seriously, we genuinely did like it. And if you want to see Andrew's thoughts in detail, you can read his review over on where?
It's on tomshardware.com/reviews/Alienware x-17.
Awesome. The URL is also down in the description, but there you go, podcast listeners. Any closing thoughts before we end the show?
I mean, I was just going to say, I think they decided not to call it Element 51 because they thought maybe now wasn't a great time to spur more conspiracy theories. And what people could say was, what's in the TIM? Like,
unfortunately, this laptop does not come with a 5G receptor, I believe, right?
No, not this one. Wi-Fi only.
I guess you're safe from that element, at least. On that note, thank you so much for joining me, Matt, and Andrew to talk about the Surface laptop and the Alienware x17. Again, you can read Andrew's review over on tomshardware.com, as well as his hands-ons with the Surface devices we discussed today. And thank you so much for joining us in the comments. We'll be back next Thursday at 3 p.m. with another edition or episode of the Tom's Hardware Show. See you then, everyone. Bye.
Bye.